Welcome to today's PerformLaw presentation on moving the small and mid-sized law firm out of startup. Today, we're going to focus on a time a law firm goes through after its initial startup phase. So after the first 1 to 2 years, once the firm has established itself enough to focus more on major strategic projects, implementations, to grow the firm, to grow the operation and the organization, and to build a sustainable and mature practice that can compete on the highest levels in the market. When it comes to the life of a law firm, we typically differentiate between 4 major phases. We got a startup phase, a growth phase, a maturity phase, and a decline. Today, we're mostly focused on a growth phase, but nevertheless, we want to take you through the other 3 stages as well and give you a brief overview of what law firms typically go through at each of these steps. Now, law firms, of course, start out in the startup phase, where pretty much everything is about survival. So what law firm partners at this point really have to make sure is that they have enough money coming in the door to keep the firm alive. You really put the bare minimum of systems and processes in place to function and to get to a point where, again, financials are steady enough that you have enough cash coming in to keep your operations alive. Once you conclude this phase, after about 1 to 2 years, firms move into a growth phase. At this point, your income is steady and you're comfortable enough to get started on putting some real emphasis on strategic efforts to grow the firm, to establish it in 1 or more legal markets based on the practice areas that you want the firm to engage in. You move past the bare minimum or basics of your firm operation and you focus on more advanced systems and processes. Again, this is the main focus today, and we'll go more in depth on this throughout the presentation. The goal here really is to build an attractive, sustainable, and successful operation for both employees and clients. The growth phase concludes with maturity, the stage at which you're profitable on a consistent basis. So profitability levels are sufficient to operate the firm competitively. At this point, most firms put a reduced focus on projects and various major implementations because really now you run your firm at optimal levels. Now, if you're not careful, however, you might move into a decline phase if you limit your strategic focus too much. The problem arises when you do not respond to changes in the industry or within the organization, for example, partner retirements, growing competitive challenges, or changes in buyer preferences in time. So if you fail to address these challenges or issues, that is when the firm goes into decline. We believe that combating this decline can be done by maintaining the same strategic energy that you showed during the growth phase. Now you have different priorities, but at the end of the day, it's still the same concept. Lastly, let's talk about this red line or curve you see here, which indicates the typical risk tolerance levels at which law firms operate throughout their lifetime. Clearly, in the startup phase, risks are at their highest levels, and this risk tolerance remains high throughout the growth phase as you implement major strategic plans and efforts. However, it declines as you move into maturity when the firm operates and performs at optimal levels. Now, if you're not careful, your risk tolerance might go towards 0, which can be a problem in the decline phase. If you fail to answer to changes, developments, or trends in the industry, in the legal market, or your firm appropriately. Next, we want to briefly recap the major components of the startup phase. Now, every law firm needs a business plan before it starts out. And this also typically includes a financial plan, especially when you start out the first time and you need to work with a bank through a loan, for example. So these 2 components are typically the first things that a new firm, new partners that want to start a firm need to think of before they even get the operation up and running. Once you've completed that part and you know what practice areas you want to work in, and you have somewhat of an idea of your revenue projections and your cost projections, and you're absolutely sure you want to go through with it, that's when you're actually ready to start running it. That's when you go into execution. So what you do next, of course, is create your entity. You decide on the type of entity you want to create. And then, of course, if you're more than one partner, you put an operating agreement in place. And so at this point, you really have the bare minimum that the firm needs to simply exist. The other four steps comprise all the major elements necessary so that you people can start working at the firm. Of course, there's an IT, an office infrastructure necessary. Now, the office itself might not be a physical space, it might be virtual, but of course, IT is always necessary. You're going to need your computers, your applications, your software to do your legal and administrative work. You're going to need a website so people can find you online and know that you actually exist. And then, of course, you have to pay your people. So you need to put together a compensation and benefit plan for everyone to get paid. Again, this initial startup phase typically takes about 1 to 2 years, and all you really are focused on is survival. Again, at this stage, you really just try to make sure to get enough money in the door to manage your cash flow, to pay your expenses, pay your people, meet payroll, and that's about it. That's really all you're going to achieve at this point before you set out for any major strategic plans to put in place to really build and grow your organization. Now, the growth phase is really the time in which you put together a strategic long-term plan for your firm, which itself is a more advanced version of the initial business plan necessary to start the firm in the first place. And on this slide, we've listed the main components that we consider part of a good strategic plan for law firms. Now, you would build the basic structure of any of these elements, of course, out, but then you can add, of course, onto it as your strategy or your vision for the firm progresses. Well, we believe this is a good start. The goal at the end of the day here is to advance and really ripen the organization and operation of your law firm. So let's go through these main elements we've listed here on this slide. Let's start with the priority development. First and foremost, as a law firm is moving into the growth phase, it is important to set priorities and develop your strategic and financial goals and objectives, some for the near term, maybe the next year, some over the next 5 years, and some over the next 10 years, and maybe really your long-term vision for what you are envisioning the firm to turn into, including all the institutional aspects of it, the mission, the values, and the vision. And once you've defined those, then it's all about putting together an execution plan to realize these identified goals and objectives. Now, each of these goals and objectives should be guided by some of these other elements we've listed here, as we believe all of these are the core and most important components of a successful, sustainable, and long-term functioning law firm. For instance, compensation and incentives, always a critical component of a law firm's strategic plan. As you move away from your pure focus on income generation during the startup phase, which is necessary to survive in the early stages of the firm's existence, now you want to shift the focus more towards strategic contributions, such as marketing, attorney training and development, and process and procedure development, recruiting, and everything that's really aimed at increasing the firm's value and affirming the strategic value of the firm. Now, those should clearly be rewarded, so now you want to also consider capital obligations, your partner admission policies, retirement provisions, and of course, for your associates, a base salary program, and subjective and objective bonuses to reward their contributions. At this point, the finance function would evolve as well. We would now move into predictive and prescriptive analytics, or KPIs, that is, key performance indicators, that are really aimed at giving the firm and the firm's owners a more complete picture of how well the firm is doing, where there are shortcomings, what should be improved, and what is really necessary for the firm to make good long-term decisions that clearly have financial implications. Ideally, you now look at metrics such as attorney performance in the form of productivity and profitability, average case values, average time cases are open, cash flow reports, advanced expense analyses, and all kinds of metrics and reports that will give the firm a much more complete picture of its financial situation. One of the biggest changes compared to the startup phase would be the organizational development component. You now want to put together an organization that the members, the employees, and the partners can appreciate and enjoy being part of. The components of this certainly include a positive employee experience, a work personal life balance, training and development, and plans for attorneys and staff performance evaluations to determine and see how well they're doing and what they can improve, a recruiting strategy for continued attraction of high performing talent, and most importantly, HR policies and procedures to guide the daily interactions between members of the firm to ensure that the work environment and the employee experience are positive, that people enjoy being part of this firm, and that they do enjoy their jobs. Compared to the startup phase, where you really try to get your hands on any business you can get, and the success is usually connected to a rainmaker involved, as your organization grows, you realize that most of your attorneys are not natural networkers or rainmakers, and you have to find different ways to get them to participate in the marketing business development process. So at this point, we believe it's important for law firms to develop marketing strategies or a marketing mix for different activities, to put together a budget and activity plans for the individual attorneys to find ways in which they can contribute, now in the form of marketing automation software or client relationship management software. You would typically have a big part that's covered with these software systems. This will allow your firm to automate certain marketing activities, but also give attorneys a platform who are not born networkers, who might be better at writing articles, blog pieces, or social media posts. As far as technology is concerned, new law firms, startups nowadays should be able to put a relatively complete system in place on day one at pretty affordable rates. Given the availability of legal software that is cloud-based, especially that can cover your case management, your time and billing, your accounting, and your HR. It shouldn't be too hard for startups to put that in place right away. However, as you grow, as you add new people, and as your organization develops, we do think a technology plan is important to address software use, to make sure features and software implementations are optimized, and people are trained, and people know how to use it the right way. And then to take it to another level, of course, law firms should consider automations and workflows to eliminate the mundane manual tasks that simply limit productivity. At this point, of course, you're also going to be able to capture more data as long as you put in certain policies and procedures in place to capture that data in your software systems to produce different metrics, which, again, this all falls back into your reporting functions as discussed earlier as part of the finance function. Now, really what you want to be able to do now is have a complete system that gives you the availability to look at more information, to make more informed decisions, as long as you capture that data. So that certainly goes hand in hand with data integrity policies that you need to put in place at this point. Another important consideration of the growth phase, of course, is the infrastructure. Now, startups nowadays can pretty much start without a real physical office, as it's pretty simple and pretty straightforward to collaborate virtually or remotely at this point. However, as your organization grows, you might decide to put an office in place, and if you started with a small one, you might just need to add additional space. And here we believe it is important to put together a strategic space plan that will address your space needs as well as remote and on-site operations. You really want to make sure you're prepared here to take on new people and ensure that they know how to work most effectively and most productively, whether they are in the office or work remotely. So now that we've outlined some of the very key aspects of the firm's strategic plan during the growth phase, we certainly want to address additional policies and procedures that might need to be put in place on top of these other elements. If you identify certain policy gaps, clearly you want to fill those to make sure your people know how to best fit into the operation, to act according to the firm's guidelines, whether that is related to communication, shareholder agreements, ownership percentages, the use of specific tools, management transparency, you name it. So as you complete your strategic plan and put elements like marketing, finance, and IT in it, you want to look at it and see whether or not there are specific policies that still need to be addressed so that you can ensure the whole team is on the same page and that people get along. The last element we want to talk about would be the platform building concept. Now that we've talked about all of these strategic planning steps and elements, the way the platform building works is essentially that you accumulate all of these different factors and elements and identify how they can contribute and constitute competitive advantages, such as intellectual property systems, processes and procedures, and other unique distinctions. So, for example, how does your financial management or your compensation system or your firm culture or your marketing system differentiate you from other firms? In the end, you can use this on the one hand to attract new clients, but also to attract top talent. In conclusion, the growth phase should have two main achievements. Number one benefit would be related to the firm internally, the people, the processes, and tools involved in your operation. Ideally, we're looking at an operational team at this point with clear legal and business functions and responsibilities. So, what we're saying is if you do implement the various elements of the strategic plan during the growth phase, then you should get to a point where your operation and your organization are performing at optimal levels and you're fully functional and productive. Number two is related to your clients. Here, you want to get to a point where your services are appreciated and used by your clients to the extent desired. To achieve this, you need to get to a point where you have a level of brand awareness and service differentiation that result in a competitive advantage to attract new clients and retain the ones you already have. This concludes our presentation on moving the small to mid-sized law firm out of startup. We hope you enjoyed this webinar, that you were able to take away some key insights and some valuable information as to what it means to move a startup law firm all the way up to the point where they can compete with other firms on the highest levels.